My name's Helen Marriage, as Charles has just said. I nearly gave him a heart attack by arriving 2 minutes ago. I've got 9 missed calls on my phone going, where are you? I'm notoriously late. In fact, one of my daughters said to me once, what does late mean, Mummy? And I think that's just such a brilliant kind of conceptual idea that the world is rolling along and there are no imperatives to turn up on time, behave, and actually, what does late mean, Mummy? It doesn't quite work with Artichoke, but we definitely have a way of thinking about doing stuff that doesn't necessarily fit within the normal neurotypical, this is how you run the world. So my company, Artichoke, does public acts of the imagination. We do very large scale. Has anyone ever been to an Artichoke event? Just so I know who I'm talking to. So the Sultan's Elephant, Lumiere London, Great Fire, Durham Lumiere, all kinds of stuff that we do up and down the country to liberate people from the daily grind of their lives and to allow them to briefly inhabit a world that we would all love to live in. I think one of the things about Artichoke is that it is ephemeral. It's here today and gone tomorrow. Like all those moments in your life that define you, but aren't part of your daily routine. Like we all get up in the morning and probably brush our teeth and have a cup of tea and then go to school or work or whatever, go shopping, manage the kids. That's our lives. But the things we remember are those moments when we fell in love or we got picked for the football team, or those extraordinary moments that you hold in your heart. And when you're on your deathbed, you'll look back and you'll think, oh yeah, I was alive then. That was just something so amazing that happened to me. So what we try and do in a kind of collective way is to create those moments for the broadest possible audience. I've never been one to work in an institution. I did briefly work at the Arts Council, but it was very unsuccessful. I usually get sacked from every job I've ever done because I just push it too hard. So in 2005, Nicky Webb and I started our own company, mostly so I couldn't be sacked unless I did it to myself. So I'm going to show you a brief presentation. I'm supposed to talk for 20 minutes. As you can probably tell, I could really easily talk for 3 hours, but I'm going to set a little timer so that I have a new phone, which is why I was late, because I got lost because the sat-nav doesn't work. And I've got 20 minutes of your time, and then you can ask me questions. And I need to work out how this works. How does this work? Oh, I see. Here we go. This is the thing that we were most famous for. This was something that took 7 years to negotiate. It closed central London for 4 days, which not even the royal funeral or the royal wedding or the state visit of President Trump does. It was a completely difficult, extraordinary act of collective imagination, in that when I started all those years ago, 1999, and we did it in 2006, I wrote to the marvellous French company Royale de Luxe to say, you'd like to come to London, wouldn't you? And they wrote back and said, really no. Really not. We don't like the English, and you're entirely hidebound by rules and regulations. You can't bend. We need you to compromise the city rather than us compromising the show, and you won't be able to do it. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then I went to talk to what's called the LOSPG, the Licensing Operations Safety Planning Group in London, which is a group of probably 25, mostly men, some in uniform, who run the days in London. Somebody's laughing because he is a man in uniform, maybe. Anyway, they run London. They're the licensing officials and the Westminster City Council and the Greater London Authority and the buses and the trains and the underground and the everything you can imagine, parking meters. And I used to go and I used to say, got this idea. It's like a fairy story with a little girl and a giant elephant, and they come and live here for 4 days, and all we have to do is close central London for that time. And they'd look at me like I was nuts, and they would say, no. And I'd say, but it'll be so lovely. And they would say, that phrase I absolutely loathe, what's it in aid of? It's such an English phrase. Is it the entente cordiale between the French and the English? Is it raising money? Is it what's it for? And I'd say, it's just lovely, which was definitely the wrong answer. And they would say, why would we do this? We'll come back to that. Anyway, carried on. Every few months, I'd go to their meetings for probably 3 years, and I'd turn up and I'd say, you know that thing? And they'd go, no. And I'd say, but it would be so lovely. And they'd say, no. So this carried on for a bit. And then they said, why would we do this? And I said, why wouldn't you? And they said, oh, that's interesting. And then one day I got irritated. I don't get irritated very often. Stress is not really on my agenda. But I did get irritated, having been in and out of this meeting forever. And I went to the meeting and I said, I'm going to give you this. This is an absolute tip. The last speaker, this is a tip if you want to make things happen. I went to this meeting and I said, hey, gentlemen, this thing that we've been talking about for all this time, it's happening on these days, and I really need you to help me. And they all went, okay. So this taught me something that I've only analysed subsequently, which is that I was asking those men to do something that they weren't able to do, which was, in my own feebleness, I was asking them to take responsibility for allowing me to do something. I wanted somebody to invite me and say, please do this, because we think it's a really great idea. And none of them, if you're the bus planning manager or the Westminster City Council or the parking meter man or the Diplomatic Protection Service or the GLA or the Westminster City Council, none of those people in the room have the authority or feel they have the authority to say, this is a really great idea. What they're all thinking is, this is a really great idea, but if I say yes and it all goes wrong, I might be in real trouble. But what I'm not going to be in trouble for is planning the buses or suspending the parking meters or, licensing the road closure, whatever it might be. So what became clear to me only afterwards was that by saying, it's happening on these dates, I need your help, everybody in the room, including me, tacitly decided that somebody else must have said yes. And in that moment, everybody was liberated to stop thinking, am I going to be in trouble? Because immediately the bus planning manager said, I will suspend the number 38. It can go on an alternative route. And the parking meter man said, you have to compensate us for the loss of income from parking meters. And I went, how much? And he said, £45,000. And I went, okay. So that moment of collective acquiescence, all of us going, okay, might be a bit dodgy, but actually, why don't we give this a whirl, resulted in this extraordinary event which lasted 4 days, 1 million people on the streets. We did it 9 months after the 7/7 bombings, which were traumatizing for London. Nobody wanted to come out, nobody was travelling on the tube, it was really frightening. And yet, 9 months later, we were able to mount this event which saw 1 million people occupy the streets, no traffic for 4 days, and everybody saying, hey, this feels like Stroud. They were literally transforming, by their own presence, the ceremonial heart of London. So as Charles says, we do lots of things. I'm just going to make an admission. Am I allowed to make an admission? My assistant sent the wrong presentation. So I'm just going to improvise. I hope you don't mind. It'll still be interesting. This is part of Lumiere Durham, the first one we did, 2009, where I went to Durham and decided that it would be a really fantastic thing to animate the city, to turn it into a giant outdoor art gallery. Any of you who've been there, it's a really dramatic, severe, extraordinary place, a cathedral and a castle built on a rock designed to keep invaders out, home of St Cuthbert and St Bede. It's a very proud and extraordinary town in the northeast of England, which is suffering real economic deprivation. So we decided to run this thing called Lumiere, which is the precursor of all the light trails and light art, light things that go on. And the first thing I decided to do was to return the Lindisfarne Gospels to Durham, because Lindisfarne Gospels, I'm sure you all know, were the work of a single monk over 40 years living in Lindisfarne, the first illustration of the Gospels into English. And they are extraordinarily beautiful, but they are in the British Museum. And if you live in the northeast of England, like the Parthenon marbles, you think they should come home. Anyway, there was no chance of that. So I thought I'd just bring them home. So we persuaded the British Library to give us the the high-resolution images of the 32 carpet plates that exist, and then commissioning a sound score and an amazing artist using very old-fashioned projection, magic lantern projection, which is not like current video. That's why the colours are so great. We created this 16-minute version of the Lindisfarne Gospels, and people stood outside the cathedral and they cried, because somehow the heritage that they held so dear was being returned to them in the most extraordinary and beautiful way. So it's very important, I think, often to link your work to what will move or animate people. This we did in 2008. This was a signature event for Liverpool City of Culture, which was European City of Culture that year. It's a French company called La Machine. As you can see, huge crowds, mad thing, really, really complicated logistically. And one of the things about doing things that are technically complex is that you absolutely need the collaboration and help of all those people in my first show who said, okay, let's do this. You can't do it without them. And one of the things I think you have to learn to respect is their anxieties. You can't just go, it's really tempting to just go, oh God, they're so boring, or they just don't understand, or whatever it is. The truth is they are doing their job day in, day out, and you, me, are a self-imposed disruptor. So if you think about cities or towns, they've become like machines for shopping and traffic. That's what we think they're about. And you expect the buses to run on time, and you expect to be able to find parking, and you expect all the things that make a city, or living in a city or a town, really straightforward. And then someone like me comes along and says, actually, let's just for a moment not do that. And so for those people working in authorities and agencies that you have to negotiate with, it is really hard to turn the machine off and say, it doesn't matter. When we did Lumiere London, it doesn't matter if 375,000 passenger bus journeys are disrupted. I mean, it does matter to those people who are trying to get home. Except that my contention is that by offering those people who are trying to get home at 5 o'clock something amazing on their doorstep, their life is changed in such a way that they actually don't want to go home. They want to stay and participate in that event with everybody else. This was a piece we did called Peace Camp, which was by Deborah Warner and Fiona Shaw, great actress and director. And it was called by the New York Times a refugee camp from heaven. This was for the 2012 Olympics, when everybody else was doing what we normally do, which is doing great big shows, great big audiences all gathered together. So because we are contrary, we did an event which celebrated what these islands have given to the world, which is the language. So we planted these extraordinary temporary camps, and inside each one was an amazing soundscape, all different. So as you wandered between, it was as if you were listening to lovers reciting the great love poetry over 500 years that these islands have generated in the 5 languages of the islands, I suppose. So Gaelic, Gaelic, Cornish, Welsh, English. Not BSL, because we couldn't work out how to do that. This, oh God. The City of London Corporation asked us to celebrate, or commemorate, let's say, the Great Fire of London. I don't think they expected this. I think they thought we'd do like a gala dinner and people would get medals. Instead of which, we decided, we did a 6-event, tiny mini festival over the course of a weekend. This was the biggest piece in it, where we worked with kids from the poor boroughs that surround the City of London. The City of London is the sort of financial heartland of London, really, really rich. And it's only got like 3,000 residents, because it's basically a trading area, square mile. But around it are some of London's poorest boroughs, Tower Hamlets, Hackney, Southwark, Newham, Islington, Camden. So we found kids who weren't in education and training and got them to engage in this project. So 75 of them came day in, day out. And we taught them all kinds of things. And we taught them obvious things like carpentry and laser cutting and all that sort of stuff. But really what we taught them is turn up on time, be part of a team, enjoy working with these people that you've never met before, come outside your postcode, because London is very divided in terms of young people and territories. And then it was 120 metres long. So if you want to know the scale, you see those little discs at the bottom? They were done by 1,200 local primary school children who were asked to write in this circular design, their hopes for London for the future. Lots of lovely things. Houses should cost 5p. My absolute favourite was more cheese. But those discs that's as tall as you. So this is 75 feet high. It's a sort of replica of the City of London before it was burnt. And then we burnt it on a barge in the middle of the river, with about 50,000 people watching and the BBC broadcasting live. Really, really difficult to persuade the Port of London Authority that this was a good idea. Lumiere London, this is Oxford Circus. Again, this whole trauma with the authorities about not closing the roads, didn't want to close Oxford Circus. In the event, I was really glad they did, because everybody lay down in the road, and I was thinking, God, if the 256 bus was coming down now, we might be in real trouble. But that sense of the streets have to work, it has to be the thing that it always is. And our idea is that it has to be the thing it never is, just so that for brief moments people create in their mind a memory that stays with them forever, and the possibility that the town or city that they're very familiar with can be different and can have different values. My contention is that if you can physically transform a place, you can forever change how people feel about it, and particularly how they feel about those people they share it with. And that experience does stay with them forever. We've just been interviewing for a very junior job in the company, and there are lots of 26, 27-year-olds. We had 213 applicants for one job, which is a heartbreaking process for us. But it's so interesting how many of those people coming into interview, when they talk about the first show, The Sultan's Elephant, they say, I sat on my dad's shoulders, I still remember it. And you sit there thinking, God, I'm old. But you actually sit there thinking, this made an impact, and that person now wants to come and do this stuff, and that you've somehow changed the thinking around what culture, the work of artists, the imagination, the life of the imagination can be for people. This you might have come across. We ran a project across from Skye to Cornwall, to St Ives and wherever, all across the country, to commemorate the first women in the UK who got the vote. This is part of 1418 Now's programme. And we commissioned banners, which is how 100 and so years ago the women who were campaigning for the vote expressed their feelings. Used to say a banner expresses on the outside what we're feeling on the inside. So we recreated those banner-making workshops, 100 of them, 100 artists working in 100 communities with groups who typically weren't engaged in the arts. And then, I have to say, bluffing is a big part of what I do. So I told everybody, including the BBC, who gave us 2 hours live on BBC One, which was a bit scary, that everybody would turn up. Who knew whether anyone was going to turn up? Not me. It was free to participate. So you make this promise, and then the night before, you actually feel really sick, because you think, is anyone going to come? And then I also said, and if we give them each a scarf in the suffragette colours, which were green, white, violet, give women votes, and if we corral them so that when they walk the streets, they're in their columns, it'll look like a moving giant suffragette flag. So I'm sure you're all clever enough to know what the disadvantage of making that promise is, which is that you can't rehearse it. So you don't know. So you're me, and you turn up, and you start coming out of the tube at Hyde Park, and suddenly there are all these women, and some of them are dressed as suffragettes, and some of them are dressed like they're normally dressed in the day, and some of them have banners, and you start thinking, oh God, maybe it's true. And then we have this whole apparatus to hand out the scarves, to get them in their lines, and they keep coming, and people keep phoning me and going, I'm on the train from Stroud, and it's full of women, and they're all coming. And I'm going, oh my God, maybe it is all right after. I mean, imagine the stress. Not that I do stress, you understand. And then this. And my colleague Kate was in the control room with all the police and fire brigade and ambulance services and all the emergency stuff, all that stuff. And all I kept doing was phoning her because she had access to the CCTV, and I was down at the front of this, which was 80,000 people, and going, does it work? Does it work? And she was going, yes, it works. So you can see the green, this colour isn't very good, but the green, white and violet. And we did them, because the original marches were all in London, but we live in a devolved world. So we did them simultaneously in Belfast, Edinburgh, Cardiff and London, women all across the country, all travelling to their nearest capital. And just incredibly moving. Like, we had a man from Hull who was one of our organisers. And at the beginning he'd said, I can work with one of two groups. I can work with the Embroiderers Guild, or I can work with this group of young women who are either pregnant or young mothers. And obviously the Embroiderers Guild would be easy. And we said, no, don't do that, work with the others. So he said, well, okay, if you want me to. So we had organised a 12-week workshop programme which talked about suffrage, talked about voting, talked about the historic campaign, talked about now, talked about issues that people might want to campaign around, talked about sewing, talked about, bringing your grandmother so she could teach you to do things you didn't know how to do. So all across the country, people were engaged in this 12-week programme. But the man from Hull phoned me, and we'd given them a little bit of money, like $2,500 to buy materials and run the thing and all that kind of stuff. So $2,500 times 100, not a little bit of money. Anyway, he rang and he said, could I have some more money? And I said, why? And he said, well, we're coming from Hull to London. We could have gone to Edinburgh, but we thought London might be more interesting. And I booked a minibus, but they're coming with their children and their mothers and their grandmothers, and I need a coach. And so we gave money for the coach. And at the end of the conversation, he said, I don't think you know what you're doing. And I said, I think so. And he said, no, most of these women haven't left Hull before. They've certainly never been to London. And this is an amazing thing for them to be part of. I have no idea what that one is. Oh, that's Salisbury, where I started. So talking of market towns and small cities, I'll whisk you through. These are very familiar places to you. And my festival, which I ran, was like a proving ground for me. I was allowed to, as the director of the festival, sort of muck around and see what I could do to convey to people that the world didn't have to be. And it's not true here, because this is not a conservative place. Salisbury, home of the Army, the Conservative Party, and the Church of England, was a very strict place. And yet, for instance, this show, which was called Mephistomania, I had to persuade the dean that he didn't mind that it started on the doorstep of the cathedral. And we had a really serious conversation. That thing about respecting other people's point of view, about the devil. And it's really tempting to laugh because it's not in my thinking. But he was talking about inviting the devil onto the doorstep, and was that necessarily a good thing? He was a very funny man. He lives near here now. And he said as long as the devil turned his back on the cathedral and ended up in the town, it was probably okay. So moving from Salisbury, this is when I started to try and see whether the things you could do that I'd done in Salisbury you could do to London. And this is some of the imagery from the Sultan's Elephant that I was just talking about, where we had to negotiate with everybody from the horse guards through to the royal household, Buckingham Palace at one end. They all said no. This was a sort of example of the fact that the Mo Farah slide is that we typically absolutely close our streets for things we think are of significance, like ceremonials and funerals and weddings and sporting events, marathons, or the triumphant occasional return of an English or British sporting team. We do a bus ticker tape thing and everyone turns out. The arts, not so much. And therefore, this argument that this was of national significance and needed the air room and the status of being in a significant place was part of the argument. You can see the scale. It's the size of a 3-story building. And I'm over by 1.5 minutes. I could carry on forever, but I could stop and take questions. Maybe that's the answer.
Just take 2 questions, if you've got a question.
Has anyone got a question?
Or give her a clap.
Has anyone got a question? Or shall I just tell you some more stories? Yes, at the back. I knew that would be the first question. Raising money is just one of the hurdles. There are so many more difficult things to do than finding the money, because the truth is the money is out there. It's just, you have to work out who's got it and why they might give it to you. So I'm going to show you this really quickly. This is a piece that we did in the north of Ireland. What I'm showing you is the current political situation in Ireland and what it used to be like. And every so often, this is Derry in the north. This is about the money. So this is an incredibly poor place, really still divided. This is the bog side. The previous slide was the fountain. This is what people think of. This is what they remember. And every summer they do this. The kids, as you can see, build these enormous bonfire stacks and they fill them with effigies of the people that they hate on the other side, depending on which side you are. And then they torch them, and they're right next to people's houses. And there are 3,000 of them. And when you hear about a peace process in Northern Ireland, I mean, there is one, and it's not as bad as it used to be, but this still happens So I went to Burning Man and thought, oh, here they do things where they burn stuff, but it's just for a different set of values. And people in the Burning Man situation use those shrines to commemorate love, loss, grief, hope, but not in a hostile way. So that's the burning. So we did this in Northern Ireland. And it's the cheapest thing we've ever done. It cost £350,000, which for us is cheap. And we worked with all kinds of kids and trainees and people not in education and people unemployed and people mentally ill and people traumatized. And then in the snow, we built it on the top of a hill in a very contested space. This is Kevin. I can tell you a story about Kevin. And we built it high up above the city so everyone could see. And you see the two cathedrals, the Catholic and Protestant cathedrals, and then there was ours, and everyone said, no one will come because this land is too frightening. And where did we find the money? In this place where nobody wanted to do peace and reconciliation. We found it in tiny little bits, 5, 10, 15,000 pound chunks. And they were wrong. 65,000 people came, and they loved it. And we kept it open for a week, and the stories of reconciliation would make you cry, make me cry even when I tell them. And then we burnt it in a gesture of letting it go. And that thing about the money, it's just the most boring part. It's not interesting. It's the thing. As long as you are passionate about what you want to do, and as long as you are determined that this is happening and I really need you to help me, it's the same with the money. This is happening and I really need you to pay. It's exactly the same. You have to make people want the thing to happen as much as you do. And then they go, yeah, of course, why wouldn't I? There.